Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our program on criminal justice reform. For those of you I don't know, my name is Renee Wisik-Barrios, and I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Philanthropy Officer for the Greater Houston Community Foundation. We're excited to see so many of you joining us today on this really important and critical topic. For those of you who don't know the Greater Houston Community Foundation well, we want to remind you why we exist. Our purpose statement says it all. We inspire and create meaningful change with our donors and for our community. We adopted this new purpose statement last year. It has been a time of great reflection and urgency for the Greater Houston Community Foundation and for our whole community. In the past 6 months, our team has been working tirelessly to respond to the pandemic crisis by providing critical relief work through the Greater Houston Recovery Fund and the Harris County Relief Fund in partnership with many of you. And we appreciate all of you who have given to those funds or contributed to our thought partnership in those areas. If you wish to learn more about that, you can go to greaterhoustonrecoveryfund.org. We have also been reflecting and actively working on our role in addressing systemic racism. As we bring people together today for conversation and learning, we want to recognize that just today, as in many days, people are suffering and in pain in the aftermath of the Breonna Taylor decisions yesterday. And we know as we see protests across the country, that is one way that people are expressing their pain and their sadness about the lack of justice. We know that this pain is very, very difficult, and we want to be part of working together with others in our community to help our community move forward. We're heartened that so many of you have joined us today because we truly believe that each and every one of us has an important role to play in bringing our community forward. For that reason, the Greater Houston Community Foundation is developing a comprehensive, effective, and sustainable plan to address racial equity challenges within our organization and our community. We have 3 initial focus areas in this work. The first is governance. Our governing board is committed to developing broader diversity amongst the board and our community committees and has a real sense of urgency about doing that. We are in the process right now of forming a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee for our staff, and we are looking at all of our internal processes as it relates to our vendors to really develop a template as to how we will evaluate them in relationship to these issues. And finally, of course, our mission is to support our donors, our community, and to work with external stakeholders like all of you. To that end, we will always be a place that welcomes all donors and works with them to achieve philanthropic impact where they are on their journey. It is important to note that we are continuing to build out our resources to help donors who want to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. One of the ways that we are doing that is we're launching a Black-led organization giving guide in November. There are many, many nonprofit organizations in our community led by local Black leaders that our donors lack awareness of. So we look forward to highlighting those organizations, and we'll be launching that in November. We also, of course, launched Understanding Houston last year. For those of you who are not aware, Understanding Houston is about measuring what matters so that together we can build a more vibrant region with opportunity for all. It is a comprehensive website with over 200 indicators across all of the issue areas that really matter to our donors, from arts and culture to housing and education and environment and community context and economic issues. And of course, criminal justice reform is one of the issues that is highlighted in Understanding Houston. This summer, the Understanding Houston team put together a social media series in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder that really highlighted the economic and social disparities among Black and Hispanic and white Houstonians in our community. If you didn't follow that series, we'd really encourage you to check it out and follow Understanding Houston. We will continue to support this effort to bring important data to our community so that we truly understand what our challenges are and what are the opportunities to make our community more whole with more opportunity for everyone. Finally, one of the important roles we play is as a convener and doing programming like the programming we're doing today. We are more than ever committed to doing that programming with an equity lens, really underscoring the need for systemic changes in our community. And so today is the first in a series that you will see us do regarding critical issues in the community with an equity lens. We want to really thank you for sharing what you wanted to learn today. Many of you sent questions and ideas, and this is just a summary of the general ideas that we heard from you. We heard loud and clear that you know there are racial inequities in the criminal justice system and that you want to see how systemic racism can be eliminated. We heard that you want to know what the current pain points are locally and nationally. A couple of you reflected on what role mental illness plays within the criminal justice system. And many of you asked, what are the positive reforms that have been achieved? How can we build on those? What are the funding gaps and the opportunities to drive meaningful change? And over we heard, how can I get involved? These are all really great questions and themes. We've brought together 4 panelists who bring perspectives and really extensive experience working on criminal justice reform that we believe will be responsive to your learning interests. We recognize that the issue is making a lot of headlines and that there's a great deal of anger and passion in our communities about the injustices that have been happening over and over again, particularly in the Black community. Our goal today is to bring multiple voices to the table, and rather than endorse one perspective, allow you to begin to get an understanding of the complexity of this issue. We welcome the opportunity to work with those of you who wish to incorporate this issue into your philanthropic portfolio, should you choose to do that. And we also recognize that many of you are already supporting organizations in our community working to make change, and we want to learn from your experience as well. Our program flow will begin with the national and local policy landscape. Then we will have Q&A, and we would ask that you put your questions in the Q&A box. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can see there the Q&A box highlighted, and our panelists will respond to those questions. Then we will have a dialogue with Sybil Sabil to reflect on her lived experience and recommendations that come from that experience. We then will have time for discussion with all 4 of our panelists about how you can get involved in the issue. And we will at that point open it up so that you can raise your hand and we can hear your voices. Because as much as we wish we could be together, we're safer on Zoom, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to see your face or hear your authentic voice. So let me start by introducing our panelists. They all have incredibly extensive bios and bring a lot to the table. I'm not going to read all the bios in total, but you can look them up later and learn about their education credentials. We're very, very appreciative of all of them and their willingness to share their experience with you. We'll start with the national landscape with Julie James and Sebastian Johnson from Arnold Ventures. Julie is Director of Criminal Justice at Arnold Ventures, where she has been developing investment strategies that advance criminal justice policy reform of fines and fees, community supervision, prisons, and integration. And before working at Arnold Ventures, she served as a senior policy advisor for the U.S. Department of Justice. Sebastian Johnson is Advocacy Chief of Staff for Arnold Ventures and was on the criminal justice team very recently. Before joining Arnold Ventures, he was also a senior associate at Friedman Consulting, where he managed strategic planning and research and did research for major philanthropies on their criminal justice reform strategies. Sebastian is also a frequent writer and contributor to the topic, and you can find his writing in many publications. Next, we will shift to the local landscape, and we have Dr. Howard Henderson with us, the founding director of the Center for Justice Research and professor of justice administration in the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs at the Texas Southern University. Dr. Henderson is involved in evaluating many different aspects of criminal justice reform and currently is evaluating the mental health collaboration program that's involved in our Harris County Mental Health Jail Diversion Program, among others. So we're very excited to have all of these panelists with us. We know that each of you are coming to the issue with different levels of knowledge and perspective, and we hope that you will be enriched by this learning experience. So before I turn it over to Julie and Sebastian, just a reminder, you are welcome to start putting questions in the Q&A at any time, and we will respond to them throughout the program and during our Q&A period. So with that, let me turn it over to Julie and Sebastian to begin our learning journey.
Thank you so much, Renee, and thanks to everyone who's joined and all the staff at Greater Houston Community Foundation for putting together what I think is going to be a really great program. I imagine you're here because you're interested about learning about the problems and about the solutions, really concrete ways to help. I'm going to be a real downer to start out though, because this, it's important to understand the scope of the problem and really some of the nuances of the problem. And I'm excited that Dr. Henderson is here to put really, fine details around the local picture as well. So this is tough, but Sebastian will end, I think, on an uplifting note. So we'll start with the reach of the criminal justice system, which is staggering. 1 in 37 adults are in prison or on probation or on parole. That's kind of the scope of control that we're talking about. And 1 in 13 adults have a felony conviction. 1 in 3 adult Black males have a felony conviction, and I'll come back to that disparity in a bit, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that throughout the day. It hasn't always been this way, though. For a very long time, from the 1920s to about the 70s, the incarceration rate was very low and consistently low, but it quadrupled to the current rate of 1 in 100. I think it's just really important to understand that this incarceration rate and the punishment culture that we're in right now is historically unprecedented. And it's actually internationally unprecedented as well. We have 4% of the world's population, yet about 25% of the world's prisoners are in US prisons and jails. So what that amounts to is 2.2 million people at any given time in local jails and in federal and state prisons. That's the blue bars there at the bottom. And often overlooked is probation or parole, who actually are hidden drivers of mass incarceration. Those are the white and yellow bars on the top of that chart there. 4.5 million people on probation and parole at any given time. So what's important about this is that some of this is personal for some of us. I know for me, 2 of my aunts cycled in and out of jail, struggling with substance use and coping with trauma that really affected them for the rest of their lives. And the experience of having a family member incarcerated, particularly an immediate family member, leads to a wide range of impacts like reduced earnings, housing instability and homelessness, poor school outcomes, and physical and mental health problems. Even short periods of incarceration like those spent in jail can make it impossible for people to maintain employment, make rent or mortgage payments, or fulfill family obligations. And then there's the direct cost to families of people who are impacted by the criminal justice system. Bail costs, legal and court fees, and the cost of staying in touch with family when they're incarcerated. More than 5 million children have had a parent incarcerated, and 1 in 5 adults have experienced the incarceration of a parent at some point in their life. It's so common. It impacts people from all walks of life. Democrats and Republicans experience similar rates of family incarceration. But this slide tells the real story. It will not surprise you that the impact of the criminal justice system is unevenly borne and disproportionately borne by communities of color and families who have low income. People of color are disproportionately impacted in a way that accumulates at every stage of the process, from arrest to bail to sentencing and to release from prison or supervision and beyond. So here's the beyond part, okay? The punishment does not stop when a person has served their time. This is on the next slide now. Every state and the federal government can and does limit access in nearly every aspect of life if you have a record or a conviction, even when it's not related to the offense, and sometimes for the rest of your life. For example, a person with a criminal history can face barriers to voting, serving on a jury, holding public office, securing employment, obtaining housing, public assistance, owning a firearm, getting a driver's license, qualifying for financial aid and college admission, qualifying for military service, and deportation for non-citizens. And you'll notice that list included a lot of things that are critical pathways to financial stability and productive engagement in society. One of the most serious consequences, and I know Sybil will talk about this later, is the widespread loss of voting rights, or maybe I shouldn't have called her out for that. I imagine she might. An estimated 6.1 million Americans, or 2.5% of the total voting age population, are denied the right to vote through felony disenfranchisement laws. And several states impose restrictions on voting even after people have completed their sentences. The lifelong consequences of having a criminal record really can impact a person's ability to find a job and maintain employment. And some of those records even include dismissed charges, not guilty findings, low-level misdemeanor convictions, and even traffic offenses that dramatically impact a person's life for the rest of their life. And then let's talk about money. So that's the next slide here. Even limited contact with the criminal justice system can result in debt, fines, and fees. These include court fees, prosecution or public defense fees. Yes, you can be charged for that free public defender. Fines that are charged as a punishment, and user fees. So a per night charge for staying in jail or in prison. And they're assessed for the main purpose of generating revenue for the criminal justice system and supporting those systems. I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of Ferguson and Michael Brown's murder there. It's not just a Ferguson problem, it's a problem everywhere in this country. One study found that, just to give you a sense of the scale for a person, people owed over $13,000 in court-ordered fines and fees. But 4 in 10 Americans don't have $400 in the bank for an emergency, which may tip many into financial ruin and result in driver's license suspensions, arrest, and jail time. And you can imagine what this must be like, or maybe you can't during COVID when so many families are in much worse financial straits. Okay, so this is my last depressing slide, and then the doom and gloom will hopefully lift for just a minute. Is all this punishment due to an increase in crime? The answer is no. Crime reported to the police is at historic lows in most states, with both violent and property crime rates falling by half nationally. And yet our criminal justice system remains stubbornly large. Is all this punishment helping us fight crime? Incarceration may have some crime suppressing effects, but criminologists and economists agree that by and large, we have long passed the point of diminishing returns. And in fact, prison time can cause more crime by destabilizing families and people and restricting economic opportunity when people get out. So if not crime, then what? Why are we where we are? My answer, and others may have other answers, is that at every turn, the most harsh punishment is sought out. The decision about whether to prosecute, whether to impose jail time or bail for people, which results in them pleading guilty, and the harshness of punishment, all of that has increased. And that's what brings us to today. So now Sebastian's going to tell us why there may be cause for hope and where your part can really be important here, all of you who are listening today.
Thanks, Julie. And just to pick up on what Julie is saying, on this slide, we see that prison doesn't really equal public safety. And I think we're in a moment for criminal justice reform where we have the data to show that. So in 36 states where imprisonment rates have decreased, crime rates have also decreased. And I think that gets back to what Julie was pointing out about the destabilizing and criminogenic effect of serving a jail sentence. There have been studies that show that serving as little as 1 to 3 days in a jail or prison can have profound impacts on the likelihood of you committing a new crime once you are released from incarceration. And what you also see is that in countries that have restructured their incarceration experience to be more focused on human dignity, to be more focused on incarceration as a last resort, and also making sure that there are ties to services and maintaining social ties to family, you see a much lower recidivism rate. At Arnold Ventures, we are really laser focused on both research and evidence and having those impact policymaking. So, we lead with the idea that you can both safely decarcerate and also reduce crime. It's borne out in the evidence. The second thing is that, from our advocacy perspective, is that, as Julie said, you see similar rates of family members incarcerated for Democrats and Republicans. And people of all backgrounds are familiar with the failures of our system. And so there is a bipartisan movement for federal and state criminal justice reforms. We saw this early in the first Trump in Trump's term with the First Step Act, which was passed by a bipartisan coalition of Democrats and Republicans and signed by the president, expanding opportunities for early release programming, and then reducing some mandatory minimum sentences. One of the most historic reforms of criminal justice in recent memory. There's also the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, which is where states agreed to take a data-driven approach to reducing incarceration and corrections costs. We support this initiative with partners such as the Pew Charitable Trust, where we are supporting technical assistance to criminal justice practitioners to ensure that they have the data and tools they need to safely and effectively reduce incarceration. A new initiative that we're invested in is the Clean Slate Initiative, which is a national campaign to automatically expunge felony records and close the second chance gap so that we're reducing the collateral consequences of having a felony record. And then finally, there have been a number of opportunities for voters to make their voices heard through state ballot initiatives. In states like California, where Prop 47 reduced incarceration significantly. In states like Florida, where Amendment 4 restored voting rights to many people who had been disenfranchised because of their felony records. And then also in states like Oklahoma, which is a red state, but where ambitious voter initiatives were passed to reduce punishment for misdemeanors and felonies and to give people a second chance. So there's been momentum in support of reforms, but at the end of the day, the progress has been too slow. So it would take 72 years for us to cut the prison population in half. So that's one of kind of the big goals of the reform movement, is meant to cut prison populations. If we continue at the same rate, it's going to take us a very long time to get to where we were. Part of that is that the incentives are to always, Shuli mentioned, to always be tough on crime. Because if you are a sheriff or a DA or an elected official who passes a common sense criminal justice reform and something horrible, God forbid, happens in your community, often it's seen as a result of that reform. People still do see incarceration as the best response to crime. And so part of our job as funders is to really change this public narrative around the best response to crime being punishment and more incarceration instead of rehabilitation, instead of addressing some of the underlying social concerns. And also making the case that, as Julie made, this is a historical anomaly, and we could have much lower rates of incarceration and still keep our communities safe.
Thanks so much, Sebastian, for that lead in. I think it's pertinent that we understand that 80% of our criminal justice system is local. And so myself serving as director of the Center for Justice Research at Texas Southern University, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you how these national reforms look in the city of Houston and sort of where the gaps are and where we need more support. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through what's happening on a local level in the city of Houston, but I want to give you an idea of sort of who we are so I can guide you through an analysis of what Houston's criminal justice landscape looks like. At the Center for Justice Research, we understand that you need minorities to help you walk through this space to understand the lived experiences of what it's like to be on that side of the conversation in terms of criminal justice reform. And so what I have for you here is essentially a slide to kind of show you the disparity in the researchers. And so I think it's important to understand that a lot of what we know about criminal justice does not come from the perspective of people who are most likely to experience the system from that standpoint. So that's the basis of that slide. So you understand that what we're going to do for the next couple of minutes is walk through a culturally responsive perspective on what justice reform looks like and what those gaps look like in this space. You can go to the next slide if you can. All right. In the city of Houston, when you look at the demographic breakdown, 62% of Harris County is composed of Black or Latinos in that space. And so that kind of gives you a landscape of the racial ethnic demographic in the city of Houston. Now, if you compare that to Chicago, Chicago's about 42% minority. So you understand right now that the city of Houston is much larger in terms of Black and Hispanics than most cities around the country. Next slide, please. Now, before we begin to look at what criminal justice looks like, it's very important that you understand what economic inequality looks like. The reason that this is so important is because we must understand that crime oftentimes is a byproduct of socioeconomic conditions. What you see here is the city of Houston ranks 8th in the country in terms of economic inequality. In other words, there are only 7 other cities in the country that are more economically unequal than the city of Houston. And I'll kind of go over that and look at what that means. Why is that important? When you think about economic inequality, it's important that you understand that that leads to a lot of other negative issues and consequences. When you think about food, when you think about housing, when you think about utilities, affordable health care, when you think about housing issues, when you think about how those relate to criminal justice systems, we know for a fact that people who are housing insecure, people who have educational deficiencies and access to economics are more likely to find themselves engaged in the criminal justice system. So when you start thinking about where are some solutions, where are some spaces where I can plug in the gaps and address some of these issues, those are direct spaces. And I think we're going to talk about a lot of that toward the end of this conversation. Next slide. Now, when you look at arrest patterns around the city, what you see here is a racial demographic breakdown of those individuals that are arrested in the city of Houston by race. What you will find is that across all of the major offense types, for everything other than DWI offenses, Blacks are overrepresented in those spaces. I'll give you a moment to take a look at that. But again, in every offense type other than DWI offenses, Blacks are overrepresented. In other words, they're larger than they are in their proportional representation in terms of arrests in the city of Houston. All right, next slide. Now, what does that disparity look like? Now, almost 4 times African Americans or Blacks are almost 4 times more likely to be arrested in the city of Houston than whites. Latinos are 1.2 times more likely to be arrested in the city of Houston. This provides some context. But let me say this is lower than the national average. Now, what that means is that there's something different in Houston that doesn't allow the arrest rate to be as high as the national average, but you still see a disparity because we're almost 4 times more likely in the Black community and 1.2 times more likely to be arrested in the city of Houston relative to racial and ethnic composition. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is, you're wondering, okay, why are we looking at the race of individuals who are shot at by the Houston Police Department? What you have to understand is the research has told us that the poorer an individual is, and the more lower their socioeconomic status, the more likely they are to be involved in police shootings. What you see here is really a measure of socioeconomic status. And a lot of times we're like, well, what does police shooting mean? Remember this, when you see police shootings, that is a direct indication of socioeconomic status. The more police shootings you see, the research tells us the lower the socioeconomic status. This gives us an idea of where we are in the city of Houston and what that really means. All right, next slide, please. All right. Now, we move from arrest to actually going to jail. When you look at Harris County across the board and most counties around the country, you saw a racial disparity in the number of individuals who were arrested. We just went through a recent bail reform lawsuit. We'll kind of talk about what the data is showing us locally, but here's just a visualization of what the racial disparity has looked like over the last several years in Harris County. All right, next slide. Okay. What you'll see here is a racial and ethnic breakdown of the individuals in the Harris County jail. What you'll see is that Blacks make up the overwhelming majority of individuals in the Harris County jail. All right, next slide. All right. Keep this in mind. 75% of those folks in the Harris County jail have not been convicted of crime. That reality remains the same despite the recent efforts to reduce the number of individuals in the county jail, but the racial disparity continues even to this very day. These numbers are just pulled just last night. The most recent numbers we find, you still see a disparity. You still see an overwhelming likelihood of African Americans being more likely to be involved or be processed through the Harris County jail and be placed there serving pretrial detention. Next slide. Okay, now Here is an overview of the most recent bail lawsuit results. And what you're going to find is the reform efforts in Harris County that were designed to reduce disparity have shown promise. What you'll find is that though the racial disparity has reduced, it's still there. What you will also find is that you also see more people who are of low socioeconomic status are now able to bond out of jail for personal or general order bond usage. So we're getting people out of jail more, but the disparity still exists. You also find a reduction in the pretrial release. In other words, people who are there before going to trial, you've seen a reduction in the number of folks that are there. But again, please note, you still see the racial disparities that are there. Unfortunately, recidivism has not changed any. I think it's because it's still kind of early. We're only about 6 months into this. I think you're going to be able to see changes as we begin to space out over the next year. You also see a reduction in the number of days that individuals are spending in the Harris County Jail pretrial, which is promising as well. All right, next slide. Now keep this in mind. Harris County has the largest number of individuals on probation in the state. Texas has the largest number of people on probation in the country. This sort of gives you a racial ethnic breakdown of what's happening. The advantage of the probation piece, even though it's a major precursor to mass incarceration, it's also an alternative to mass incarceration. And so I think you want to understand what are the alternatives, what's happening in the city of Houston, and understanding who's really under the control of the Harris County criminal justice system. All right, next slide. Now, recognizing that there are issues in terms of returning back home from incarceration in the state of Texas, the data tells us that about 70,000 individuals returned to Texas. About 12,000 individuals returned to Houston after being released from prison. That's 1 in 5 in the state of Texas. We recognize that there's an issue with housing support. And so what we put together was a dashboard that would allow individuals getting out of prison who needed to find resources, housing, medical assistance, working with the Houston Health Department so they can identify resources that they need. What we have found, the Center for Justice Research, is that the more resources that we can provide, the more access to services that we're able to provide, the less likely they are to be engaged in the criminal justice system. And so I think we're going to move forward and kind of have a conversation about what that space actually looks like.
Great. Thank you to Julie and Sebastian and Dr. Henderson for giving us a landscape of where things are locally and nationally. As we move to Q&A, Allison, why don't you take the screen, stop sharing the slide just so we can see each other. We're going to do some Q&A for about the next 10 minutes, and then we are going to move to hearing from Sybil Seville and Diane Higginbotham. There were several questions in the Q&A, and our panelists have begun answering them, but I'm gonna lift up a couple because I think they're interesting, and obviously keep sending them in. One of the comments was someone trying to understand that it's not skin color that explains the disproportionate number of people in the criminal justice systems, but rather it is socioeconomic status. I think there's probably a complex answer to that question. Who would like to take it?
I'll answer that one. So here's the way it goes. If you put all poor people in a group, the data tells us that you're going to find more Blacks and Hispanics in that group, okay? The research also tells us that when you control for socioeconomic status across the different racial groups, African Americans and Hispanics have a greater likelihood of being caught into the criminal justice system. So though poverty affects everyone, the reality of it is you have higher proportions of individuals in these Black and Hispanic groups that are more likely to be engaged in the criminal justice system, more likely to have housing concerns. All of the social problems that we can talk about from here to the end of time are directly impacting African Americans and Hispanics more, even though it does impact non-minority poor. The reality of it is when we're talking about criminal justice and we're talking about public health, talking about COVID-19, another recent example, those are directly impacting minority groups at a disproportionate rate.
Yeah,
well,
and can I just add
please.
to that, Renee? Yeah, thanks. Because I think that's right, and it's going to be a thing that we argue about till the end of time. But I think, but until we reckon with the fact that the reason for that increased poverty is systematic policies since the beginning of, before the beginning of this country, but even recently, really. I mean, you know, you take federal redlining, which prevented Black families from having FHA-backed loans, which really, I mean, that was a blow to the generation of intergenerational wealth. So people were subsidized, white people were subsidized, and Black people were kept out. And so until we kind of do that, it's really hard for me to kind of say it's not about skin color, because it's, yeah. Anyway, that's my piece. Thanks.
Sebastian?
Yeah, I was just to piggyback to give an example about how these two things intersect, but still that there's definitely evidence of racial bias in the system. The collateral consequences are not felt evenly at all. So if you are a white person who has a criminal record, there have been studies that show that you have a higher chance of being employed than a Black person without a criminal record. Part of that is because Blackness and criminality are associated in people's minds. I think the other part of that is that the systemic barriers to employment are not just about having a criminal record. They're based on race, and so the idea of having a criminal record is going to impact you differently if you're white or Black or Hispanic. And so definitely correlated, but evidence of bias in the system.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to some of the other questions that are here. Let's see. Someone is asking about what is the data on an individual's likelihood to commit a subsequent crime due to the challenges of finding employment after being released? So what can a company do? They're also asking from a hiring perspective to help make a positive change. Who wants to take that?
So that was the reason why we put together that dashboard, so people could identify resources, because the research tells us that the longer they're out of employment, right, the longer they're out of housing options, the faster they are and more likely they are to go back to prison. As you saw in the Harris County data in the most recent report from the bail reform lawsuit solutions, the recidivism hasn't changed. And recidivism hasn't changed because the resources to prevent recidivism haven't changed. So we often try to piecemeal the response to recidivism, but the reality of it is a lot of those issues are really outside the purview of the criminal justice system. So we're looking at education, we're looking at housing, we're looking at employment access, we're looking at livable wage, we're looking at public health. All of those factors we oftentimes don't look at and focus just on how fast someone goes back. The reality of it is we need to try to figure out how to extend the amount of time before those stress points begin to attack them in whole.
Other comments on that in terms of positive impacts you have seen of programs that are trying to employ ex-offenders? All right.
Renee, I submitted a written response. I'm not sure if it got in there, but if just for folks, I don't have to say it. I can read it.
Okay.
I've seen a company locally that hires a lot of ex-offenders. The company is 5-minute oil change or something like that. But I have been from the north side to the west side, east and south. And wherever they are located, they have ex-offenders. So I'm proud of that. I don't know too many other where you can just see and a person like me ask questions. So you see that they are hiring these people and giving them an opportunity to have a living wage. And that is awesome.
That's great. Let's shift now, since you spoke up, which is great, Sybil, to the dialogue with Sybil and Diane, and then we'll come back to time with Q&A with all of our panelists in a moment and about ways you can get involved. I know there was an overarching question of how do we make the biggest difference in reform, and so we'll get to that in a moment, but I want to introduce Sybil Seville and Diane Higginbotham. Sybil Seville is a formerly incarcerated woman who uses her lived experience to advocate for bail reform and trauma-informed training for judicial personnel. She is currently the fellow for Pure Justice, and she graduated from the inaugural Smart Justice Speakers Bureau series created by Anthony Graves in collaboration with Texas Southern University. She is also a member of the community working group of the independent monitor for the O'Donnell versus Harris County consent decree regarding the misdemeanor bail practices. So thank you so much for joining us. And now we are going to hear from Sybil and Diane. Thank you.
So thank you, Renee. Sybil, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your willingness to share your time and your story. I know that you are very open about your story, but I also just kind of want to say off the top that please only share what feels comfortable, obviously, with you. So there really are three things that I'd like to have you kind of expound upon during our brief conversation. One, I want to hear a little bit about your participation on the community working group for the independent monitor for the O'Donnell versus Harris County consent decree. That is that bail reform case that Dr. Henderson mentioned. Also want to try to hear about your involvement in trying to get policy passed regarding trauma-informed training for personnel in the judicial system. And really want to be able to have time to discuss your reentry and the issues that you have faced. I know Julie mentioned, about voting, but certainly there are a lot of other issues that I know that you have faced. So let's jump right in. So what was the bail process like for you? And really kind of tie that in with how you got involved with working with the community working group.
When I first went to jail, Diane, they wouldn't even offer me a personal recognizance bond. So I stayed in jail, period. I got involved with the community working group because I had done work with Texas Advocates for Justice, and we had gone to the Capitol, learning how to impact change through legislation from the Anthony Graves Smart Speakers Bureau, taught us how to navigate the Capitol. We met those people, we related, we told our stories. The person over the community working group was looking for someone with lived experience. Because I am so involved and have such a conviction from what I do, someone referred me to them. So we met, the introduction was via email, and we met the next day. Need I say, hey, here I am, I'm giving my feedback. And we've learned so much from that. Let me give you just a few things, a few notes from our meeting, update from July the 6th.
Yeah, and before you even get into that, so tell us, how long have you been involved with this community working group?
We just started in July. So
okay.
Yeah, in July, we just started. Before that, we were getting things together. But other than that, just this July when we first started.
Okay, so tell us, what's one of the key things that that you can share right now?
The key thing is it's working.
Okay.
It's working. People are getting bond. We are no longer criminalizing people for poverty because they cannot afford to pay.
Sorry, so tell us exactly for those that may not really kind of understand what that really means. So in the past, so you said that you couldn't get out because I'm assuming, but please tell us to be sure, that is about a lack of funds to get out on bail. And so this committee now, what does that look like for someone today?
What it looks like today is a lot better because people can get a bond today. And for the gentleman in the question, and I keep having to go to racism. See, skin, you cannot differentiate or put them apart, the skin color and socioeconomic background. That's impossible. That's just impossible. So when I went, I didn't have the socioeconomic problem. I was from a middle-class family, but then I was an adult. I had left my family.
Right.
And as an adult, when you go to, if it's just a misdemeanor, and then you go back to jail on a driving ticket, something very minute, they wouldn't give me bond then because I had already been to jail once, and they would not give me bond. Today, that looks totally different. Today, you will get bond because people like me and people like you guys, we advocate or we inform and educate.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you guys do. Inform, educate, and let people know. I advocate and educate and tell them my lived experience, what has worked. So today, you can get a bond as long as you have never violated a bond and they know you're going to come back. You're going to come back. Because why would I keep you in jail and risk you losing your job, your destroying your family foundation, all of those things, when I can let you out to continue to deal with your family, be healthy, safe, come back to court and go from there and show the court that yes, I'm a responsible citizen. It was a mistake. I'm not running. I'm facing this, period.
Good. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing around trauma-informed training for those in the judicial system.
Okay, so I got together with the ACLU. They were asking me, what's the problem? What's the problem? If we do not address the trauma, we can't address anything. So my work has been, it started in 2015, becoming a veterans peer support specialist.
Okay.
From there, I went on to become a veterans court advocate mentor for jail diversion for people that were veterans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I needed to write something to change legislation, because if legislation was not changed, then people are going to be treated unfairly. Mental health plays a huge role. Trauma plays a huge role. I have been diagnosed with some mental health things. I am on medication. If that medication stops working, which frequently for many does, one has to switch to another cocktail medication. In that process, your body is responding maybe good, maybe not. I have been one who literally took off my clothes in the street because my skin was crawling. I didn't need a police officer. The training, everyone has to know the training, because why are we calling 911 for a policeman to de-escalate a situation to assess whether or not a person is in a mental health crisis? One must learn to assess body language, how not to look a person directly in the eye, because that might antagonize them and increase aggression. Now, me just doing what I do and taking the classes that I've taken, if I can do it, why can't they?
Right.
I don't understand that. Okay, let me just say, this is all a control thing. You get a badge, you have control, you do not know how to delegate your authority, and simply because of the fact that you know that you are covered by union laws, you can get away. All you have to do is say, I was in fear for my life. I am not going to hurt you. If you would talk to me and ask me first, what is going on? Give me an opportunity to address that before you shoot me or unholster your weapon, then maybe the entire shooting scene and deaths from policemen would be different.
So what are you, in regards to that, what are you, with the policies that policy changes that you're looking for, what are you looking for the personnel in the judicial system to start having in regards to trauma-informed training?
Okay, lawyers, prosecutors, judges, correctional officers, police officers, they need to have not less than 8 hours of trauma-informed care training to be repeated refresher courses, all right, every 6 months to a year. You have to recertify because we need to know, are you keeping up? That needs to be monitored. So that is what we're doing, wanting to provide the training for them. Because if we provide, if they know the training, then they can give the proper service. They won't be so quick to say, okay, put that person in a cage. They can't learn. No. How about, all right, this person doesn't need a cage. This person needs a therapist. They need to talk to somebody. They need help. We need to find out what triggered them to be here where they are in the situation at the moment. And if we do that, then we would have different outcomes.
Okay, I know because we're running out of time, but I'm just thanking you so much. I do, Renee, if I could just have one little minute, I just want to ask you about your re-entry and just some of the issues that you've been facing, because I do think it's important for our audience to understand the issues that you're facing around housing and unemployment, and as Julie stated, like around voting. So if you can just touch on that a little bit.
I'll do that really quickly because time is of the essence. All right, so I've had a lot of barriers. For me, I'm still dealing with barriers. I've been off of paper since 2002, and for those who don't know, I have been off of parole since 2002. When I got off of parole, I was able to vote. But mind you, I got out in 1998. So between 1998 and 2002, I could not vote, which to me made no sense because I am paying into the system that detained me. Secondly, we always have to check up. There's a box on every application. Have you been convicted of a crime? Not a felony, not a misdemeanor, a crime. The moment you check that box, a wall goes up to the person that wants to give you housing or the person who you are applying for a job. I have paid so much money in fees to apply for apartments, and they just take the fees. They just lie. They're non-refundable. If I can't get a job, how do I get the money to continue to pay for fees to get an adequate place to live when no one won't give me an opportunity? I feel like this, even now, in this house that I am in. The landlord here has rain hung over my head. You're an ex-offender. You have a background. I didn't tell the owner of the house. Make sure you pay on time. I don't want to have any trouble with you. If I have any trouble with you, if I hear anything, well, why? So let me say this. It does not matter about the accomplishments that I have made since 1995. It does not go away. I am still being punished. I'm still living a sentence. So what is it like? There are very few resources. We need money. We need people to provide education. We need housing. We need people like me that will go to another directly impacted person and grab their hand, mentor them, support them, walk with them, show them, okay, you can't get mad at every little thing. Because it's not what life throws at you, it's how you respond to it. And that has been a struggle, because I would be lying if I were to say I am not frustrated, angry, and upset. And I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you so much, Sybil, for being open and very straightforward. We appreciate your candor, and I'll turn it back over to Renee.
You're welcome, and
Yes.
thank you.
Absolutely, Sybil. We really appreciate you being honest about what you've learned and challenging all of us by sharing your story and sharing how resilient you are and how much work you've done for yourself and for others. It's really, really inspiring. I'm going to ask all of our other panelists to come back on video now. We have had a lot of questions in Q&A, and I have some direct questions that I'm going to ask our panelists about how people can get involved. I'm going to let Sebastian and Howard get back on screen here for a second. But while they're doing that, I also want to say that, you know, we have over 60 participants and we are really interested in hearing from you. So if you want to use the raise your hand function, you can do that so that we can actually know to unmute you if you want to make a comment or a question. While that's happening, I wanted to address a couple of questions to our panelists. If you are someone who wants to get involved and wants to really understand how judges and elected officials and others stand on these issues of criminal justice reform, what are the best resources that you can use to educate yourselves on that? Sybil, do you want to comment on that first, and then maybe Julie?
You said the best sources to educate yourself. I say go to your local city councilman. I say go to the town hall meetings that we have. We have commissioner meetings every Tuesday. We need to be there. Show up. You want to know? Go. Beat your feet. No one's stopping you. If you really have a desire to see what's going on, I challenge you. Go. Don't just sit on the sidelines. Be an active participant. I appreciate the fact that you guys are philanthropists and you want to give your money, but be educated and go use your voice with your money to back and make something known.
Great advice. Julie, other comments about resources and where people can go? Obviously, attending city council, commissioners court meetings is one way, looking at the proceedings of the legislature. What other things?
Yeah, that's super important. I think what we really need to keep our eye on is that there are so many decision makers who are elected and who have impact on all of the things that we've been talking about today, from prosecutors, judges, sheriffs, mayors who control police departments, and state legislatures who make the rules around what punishments are. So I think all of that stuff is really important, and there are a couple of national resources. Ballot Ready is one, ballotready.org, where you can look at that. And then the Daily Appeal, no, it's not the Daily Appeal. I'll send it to Renee. There is a website, a journalistic arm of the Justice Collaborative, the Daily Appeal. It is the Daily Appeal. And they're looking at specific races across the country. And I note that they've done a couple Zoom-ins on Texas races. So that's
Great.
just for getting informed.
Wonderful. And we'll be sharing very extensive resources after this webinar with everything that gets mentioned here, along with a guide of local and regional organizations that are working to reform criminal justice. So obviously we've had a lot of questions from people about what will really make a difference. What role can philanthropy really play? So as we get into that, let's break it down in a couple of different ways. Let's start with talking about what strengths do you see on the issue in Houston? What's currently giving you some inspiration? Let's go to Howard first and then Sybil on that, and then we'll zoom in a little broader and get Arnold Venture's perspective as well on the philanthropic scene.
Again, I think the bail reform approach that the city and county is taking is very positive. I think you now have poor people and working class people who are able to get out of jail without having to mortgage their life. That's very promising. I think you also have a city that seems to understand the need for reform and access and opportunity. That's very positive because I think you have a philosophy at the top who understands that the need for change is there. I think you also have private corporations who now understand that they can play a role in this space, which is very positive. I think Houston is unique in that regard because you have a lot of private interest, and I think they've now gotten on board to helping reform the system. You look around the city, you have numerous entities that are collaboratively engaged in transforming the system, and I'm very optimistic about the city being able to transform its existing criminal justice space.
Great. Sybil, what gives you inspiration and hope about Houston?
We are a diverse city. And just like Howard said, we're having the conversations. We're having so many collaborative efforts going on that we're being heard. People are ready to change. They understand that we're spending too much money in the wrong places. Money needs to go other places. One is education, training people, letting them know that, again, I'm just so trauma informed because my life has been so traumatic that if we address those core issues, I'm happy that that conversation is being had. I'm happy to be backed by Representative Ronald Reynolds. I'm so happy for that because it is he who authored the bill for trauma-informed care training. So I see a lot of collaborative efforts happening and people really not just talking, but putting their time in and going out there and sharing information so that things can change. So that's inspired me quite a bit.
Great. And before we get to the national hope, I want to bring up a couple of questions in the Q&A, which I think are interesting. Someone is asking for you all to speak to the role of over-policing in Black and Brown communities in relationship to incarceration rates, as well as militarization of police forces. And we know in Houston, right now, we've got a debate around, will there be more police reform? How are the talks going to go between the union and the police departments? If anybody wants to address that in their comments as well. Who wants to start off on over-policing in minority communities?
I think it's been a pervasive problem for as long as we can probably remember. The question that we haven't answered is how many police are necessary to maintain public safety and to reduce disparities. So Houston, like most other cities, you have over policing. And I think that's because we follow a policing philosophy that believes that presence equates to lower crime, which it hasn't always been the case. And the research has shown that that's not necessarily true. I think the issue is, how do we hold police accountable? How do we remove their control from police unions, which is a broader systematic issue that we haven't yet figured out how to do in the city of Houston. But I think that there's promise there because I think we're on the cusp of a lot of changes. As you mentioned, Renee, we're on the cusp of a new police union contract. I know that we're waiting on the police advisory board to come out from the mayor and give recommendations on how policing is going to look in the city of Houston. So we're all on pins and needles to see what that looks like. But you know, we're fighting a system that's historic and it's been there. It's well established, and it's very difficult to transform policing overnight.
Any comments from Julie or Sebastian on that one?
Yeah, I think that, I think our focus at Arnold Ventures is looking at ways in which systems are broken and how we can contribute bipartisan energy to reforming those systems. And I think policing is one that has been an interest for us for a long time. Part of it is to the point that Sybil made, about having other agencies. I think we've gotten into a conversation around do we defund or not, but I think underlying that are some common sense reforms that actually left and right can agree on. Are there a set of crises that you need to have a non-emergency response to? How do we make sure that crisis workers and trauma workers are responding in communities instead of policing? From the militarization point, how do we make sure that officers have the infrastructure that they need, but that we're also looking at the ways in which there's rent seeking by companies to produce this stuff and send it into communities? And so you have to look at how we interrupt those profit centers as well. And I think just, to that point, one of the things that I've been encouraged about in the national conversation in the philanthropic community is how much over the last 10 years, philanthropy has really stepped up to make sure that the momentum for criminal justice reform continues. There have been a number of new funders who come into this space and who have invested significant dollars in reducing incarceration and making these alternatives real. And I also think that funders have done a better job of responding to the point of the question, the energy that's coming from communities and the streets themselves, which is much more around abolition and how we stop investing in systems as opposed to reforming systems. So we have to invest in alternatives as a part of moving away from incarceration and not just think about how do we change current practice.
And let's break that down a little bit. I want to make sure our audience understands when you talk about investing in alternatives, what all you mean. I do know locally we have a number of diversion programs. We have a diversion program for human trafficking victims. We have a diversion programming for mental health. We have diversion programming for the homeless. We have a homeless outreach team. We have a lot of those things. From what I've read, the evidence has been positive for them. None of them are working at a level of scale, though, that would be transforming anything. Am I correct in that? And is that some of what you're talking about as alternatives? Or what other things are you wanting to see people to invest in?
I'll respond briefly, and I want others to get into the conversation. Yes, diversion programs. Are we still routing those diversion programs through prosecutors' offices, through the sheriff's department? Or are we investing in community organizations that are rooted in the places where the problems are and are staffed by those people? So when we talk about an alternative, it can't just be that the prosecutor decides who gets diversion and who goes to jail. You see the same disparities. You also see some of the same incentives around who is paying for diversion. Often these programs have hefty fees when they're run through law enforcement offices that end up excluding mostly Black and brown people for being able to pay for them. The diversion itself can be a way into the criminal justice system, because if you have a substance abuse problem and you fail that diversion, then you go to jail, as opposed to if you were in a community diversion, that wouldn't be an option. And then also, if you are putting all your diversion into law enforcement, you continue to starve the other services that the public needs to offer in community health and crisis intervention. So when we think about diversion, it also has to be diverting those resources into community and into service providers.
Thank you so much. And Sybil, you were nodding your head, so I'm assuming you want to respond. So what would you like to say about this subject? You're on mute.
Okay, so I just so agree with Sebastian on a lot. Crisis intervention, we need that. We need, instead of a 911 line, we need a specific line to go to people who are trauma trained, because that should be the first line, the first number to call to if something's going on that a person doesn't understand. Not everything warrants a police officer with a weapon. Why? That's not right. Again, we also need housing. We need a place where people can come, and it's like a one-stop shop. Jail diversion isn't working because of substance use. If you're not learning what your warning signs, your triggers are, if you don't address that core issue, why you even started using drugs in the first place, how do you not recidivate? you don't have any other choice, because at some point you will use a gang. You will. And when you use a gang and they give you a urinalysis, you're going to jail. Because about policing, the policing situation has been going on a long time, but until we get independent oversight for policing, and instead of having prosecutors and police officers, all of them, see, they have a relationship. We need independent prosecutors to come in and look at things, because if I know you, then of course I'm gonna be in favor for you. I'm not gonna charge. It's gonna be for the person who has the record, not for you. And that's not right. That's all I have to say on that.
Thank you for that comment. Howard, before you comment real quick, I just want to tell our group, we were supposed to end at 1:15. We're going to go an extra 10 minutes because there's still some questions in the Q&A that I feel are very important to answer. If anyone needs to drop off, we understand, but we'll wrap up in about 10 minutes. We have some questions about the age of offenders that haven't been answered that I want to make sure get answered. And Howard, I know you're about to comment.
Yeah, so again, I think Sybil hit it right on, and that is, as we move forward and as we try to transform these communities, it's very important that we don't make a move or a decision without talking to people who are directly impacted. That was what was missing in all the decisions before this point. This is really the first period of time where people have intentionally brought in groups to have a conversation about how the recommendation is going to impact that particular group. If you do that, I think we move in the right direction naturally.
That's a really helpful and important comment, that the community's got to be part of the solution, and communities who've been most impacted have to be fostering those solutions. I wanted to get the question answered. Someone asked, what is the average age? And if you look at Houston and Harris County, are we encountering that juveniles are getting, are young people the ones most likely to get connected to the criminal justice system? At what age are people getting connected to the system? What does the research show? Who wants to answer that?
Well,
I hadn't.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, while you're getting your slides ready, because I know you got an answer for Houston, what I said in the chat was that 1 in 10 Black men is likely to be arrested before they're 23. And so that's a range, right? That means that a lot of kids are getting arrested when they're in their teens. And I heard, sort of really well-respected sociologist Veshla Weaver once say, if you look at the data, arrest is the #1 intervention we are putting on Black boys. That is the intersection, aside from school, that's the intersection that Black boys have with the kind of the offices of state, the apparatus of government. So if you look at it in that way, and that really kind of took me in a different frame, you're not going to inspire a whole lot of trust in the system that way, right? I mean, there's what's the reason to kind of buy into that? So it's young. It's not all happening in schools. It's out on the street too. So we talk about the school to prison pipeline. That is an issue, but it's also about police on the street, and that's why I answered the question in that way.
Thank you for that. And Sebastian had to just sign off, but we absolutely appreciate his participation, and we'll share that with him later. Howard or Sybil, did you want to respond to that? And we'll try to answer about one more question, and then I'm going to do our wrap up to be respectful of everyone's time.
So from what I've been seeing, the age starts from like at 13 to 14 years of age. It starts in middle school. This is where they begin to act out. They're getting a little freedom. They're starting to smell themselves, and it's bad, especially over here. Addicts, even though we've had a program to go in there to help the students when there are behavioral issues, instead of calling the police, they would call a social worker or have a social worker there in place to ask questions from the student, and then bring the parents in, and you get a whole team of people to work it out that way instead of locking a person up. For me, that's extremely important. I work with youth, and it's not because, some of the youth are because they've seen so much abuse. They've been tormented all their lives. They've been abused all their lives in so many different ways. They don't know what else to do. Their parents are A, not involved. B, or let me say A, missing, locked up. B, uninvolved. C, they feel alone and have no support. When you feel alone and have no parents or nobody that you feel like you can share your deep secrets and your pain with, you're gonna act out. It's just that simple. And if I can't, or if they can't, if they don't have Medicaid, and I'm sad to say that they are wards of the state, but this is what's happening. They're on government assistance. Thank you for the government assistance. But if they can't get into a therapist to make the necessary behavioral changes necessary, or give them the help or medication, both, that they need, we're in trouble. And it just keeps going.
Thank you for that. Howard, did you want to comment on that? And then the last question we'll take, and then I'll go to closing remarks, is someone asked directly to this discussion, to what degree do we have collaboration locally between our mental health organizations and systems and our criminal justice system? So if any of you know of some good active collaborations and you want to mention that, and then I'll move to closing remarks.
Yeah, I just want to paint a general picture. You know, youth crime is trending down in Harris County, even though the detention population seems to be showing a rise over the last year and a half. The issue is the average daily population, which is going up, but they're also filing fewer motions on these kids. So you have fewer kids who are getting in the bulk of the trouble. The research tells us that about 6% of the kids are responsible for almost 80% of the delinquency. So you have a smaller population actually doing more. So that can be seen as progress. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's happening around Harris County.
And anyone want to comment on this last question about active collaboration between mental health agencies and the criminal justice system locally? Is that happening? Just a quick comment on that.
Yeah, I just not.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, my internet is. I would say that there is federal support for this sort of work, and there are models out there. So it's not the case that this is something that hasn't been, thought about, worked through in a number of communities. I'm thinking of the Justice Mental Health Collaboration Program from DOJ and the Stepping Up Initiative. But it's sadly not, the work is not done. And a lot of the issue is the capacity on the behavioral health side and the willingness to work with justice-involved people.
Okay, and we know, from our understanding Houston data, we do not have nearly enough mental health practitioners or access to it in our community. Howard or Sybil, did you want to comment on that quickly?
Yeah, the Harris Center is doing some great work. They're collaborating with, Texas Veterans Association, Texas County Community Centers. I think if you want to find out more about your mental health in Houston, you want to check out the Harris Center.
Great. Sybil, final comment on that?
I think also to check out the Mental Health of America, where you could get a lot of help. I'm a mentor over there, so please go.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for their incredible sharing, their experience, their wisdom, their knowledge, the hard facts, the truths, and also some sources of inspiration. If we were all together, I'd say give them a big high five, give them a round of applause. You can do reactions instead, I think, at the bottom of your screen if you want to do that. But we certainly know they have a lot of ways to spend their time, and I hope we were all enriched by learning from them. And we'll be sharing a lot of follow-up information that they will be providing to us, including ways you can get involved, organizations you could consider, reading you can do, advocacy you can do. We know you're all coming from different perspectives, and certainly our job is just to give you lots of different options of ways that you can engage. And so we plan to do that, and we'll be sending you that information next week. I'd also like to go back to just our slides real quick. We have some upcoming programs that I want to make sure our audience is aware of. If you are thinking, how do I incorporate this into my giving plan? If you're a GHCF donor or client, we want to spend some time with you in a couple of weeks talking about your giving plan. Many people are are really trying to figure out in this time of a lot of uncertainty between the pandemic and what's happening with the racial justice movement and other things. Maybe you're starting to think, I want to give a little bit differently than I have in the past, or I want to respond to these crises and these emergencies. How do I do that in a thoughtful way? Our team will be on to help you think about your giving plan and how to align your values and your giving. And then through our Understanding Houston series, as I mentioned, we're continuing to do programs with an equity lens. So the next program will be listening, learning at housing inequities in Houston, and we'll be bringing together a great panel to look at multiple perspectives about the affordable housing issues for Houstonians, whether they're renters or trying to buy a home, and how the pandemic has exacerbated that. So definitely encourage you to register for that. And then we will still have Family Philanthropy Day in November. This is our multi-generational opportunity to help our young people get involved and continue to develop their giving hearts. It will be virtual, but it will still be exciting. So certainly would appreciate your attendance at any one of those programs. And just know that our whole team is here to support you. We know this was a really heavy topic today. It's a very important topic. We all have to sort of face the complexity of this, and we've got to find hope and inspiration so that we use, as Sybil said, not just our wallets, but our voice to make a difference. And I know that I was very moved to do that, and I hope you were too. And so if you want to, debrief this conversation, talk further, have more discussion about how things are in Houston and how we can make a difference, we as a team are certainly open to your questions, your ideas, your concerns, your calls. So reach out to us. The Greater Houston Community Foundation is here for you. There are no questions that are too big or too small for us to spend time with you on, because we really want to support our community's learning journey. We know that there are a lot of incredible people in this community and so many of you who joined this call, and we'd hope this is an opportunity for us together to really look forward. And finally, we really want to thank from the deepest bottom of our hearts, Julie James, Howard Henderson, Sebastian Johnson, and Sybil Seville. You're all incredibly important assets to our community locally and nationally. You're doing work that is difficult, that is hard, that is necessary, but is also truly inspiring. So with that, we want to thank you for spending time with us today. We appreciate you. Follow us on social media. Follow Understanding Houston if you have not been doing that yet. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe and reach out to us. Take good care.